Hey, everybody, welcome to Fictionology. This is Gideon,
And this is Bardicans.
and we're coming to you live from our separate, top secret, undisclosed COVID quarantine bunkers, hiding in style, waiting for civilization to resume desperately.
Tell me about it.
I literally just did.
Oh,
Yeah, I literally just. Were you not listening?
oh no. Yeah, I was. I was just trying to have an
No,
input.
I'm no, what I appreciate that. I do, but
Oh,
I don't. We're not going to talk about this anymore.
oh, okay. Then what will we talk about?
I'm so glad you asked. As a matter of fact, I thought today's topic would continue our current trend of Star Wars related stories, Star Wars related episodes. This is episode three. This is episode three, Star Wars episode three. Except it's about Star Wars Squadrons, the highly anticipated EA space fighter simulator. That's supposed to be, I guess it's the way we talked about it before. I guess kind of a throwback to the early mid '90s X-wing Tie Fighter games. Is that how you describe it?
Yes, and I'll get more into that when we talk about the nuts and bolts of the game.
Fair enough. For those two of you of the four of you total watching or listening, those of you who don't know, Star Wars Squadrons is a concerns itself with basically it's a tale of two feuding fighter ace wings. One for the victorious Rebel Alliance slash New Republic, and the other representing the wounded but vengeful shattered galactic empire. The most of the game takes place a year or so after the events of Star Wars Episode 6 Return of the Jedi, after the Battle of Endor. And, so the second Death Star is destroyed. The Emperor is dead, although we find out, spoiler alert for Star Wars Episode 9 Rise of Skywalker, it didn't take. But
Not
technically, the
quite.
Emperor right now is out of commission. Darth Vader sacrificed himself. Balance has been restored to the Force, but not the galaxy. And certainly
Hmm.
not politically, certainly not militarily. The Empire just didn't fold instantly. It's been broken, but the shards are still there, and they are sharp, and they're looking for blood. Enter Titan Squadron. This is the Empire's one of their ace fighter programs.
Hmm.
And their counterparts, they square off against their counterparts in Vanguard Squadron, excuse me. And the game concerns itself with the clashes between these two and the role that those clashes play in influencing the overall war. With again the fledgling New Republic looking to reclaim the galaxy and restore justice and democracy, and the Empire looking to gain the ground it's lost in the absence of the Emperor.
Right.
Now, with that in mind, I'm going to kind of turn it over to you, Bardicans, because you were the purchaser of the game, you were the player of the game, you're the video game enthusiast, you understand the subtleties and market trends and things like that about games that I just don't fully appreciate. So I may have some questions for you. But other than that, I want you to take it from here and give your like full, unadulterated, pure, raw thoughts about Star Wars Squadrons, which again launched today.
All right. Well, first of all, I should just say that anybody who's ever played the old X-Wing or TIE Fighter series, as well as even perhaps the Jedi Starfighter series that we played on the Xbox back in the day, will feel right at home here in this game. You take control of one of several different types of ships. Usually you get a choice, and in multiplayer, of course, you can choose. And most of them are familiar, and well, you fight against other ships, dogfighting in space, and sometimes you need to take out larger targets such as cruisers and stuff like that. So
Even
um,
Star Destroyers?
yeah, well, you do some damage to some star destroyers.
It's a
But
classic. Every Star Wars video game involves destroying a Star Destroyer somehow.
yeah, it's a pretty common trope. I think the air destroys star destroyers
That's true.
in a lot
A
of
a
these.
stern glance will cause a Star Destroyer to collapse.
That's right. um, well, I mean, as far as my first impressions of the game, I kind of found it a little boring. Now, I think the dogfighting combat is pretty well done. I mean, as far as how you control, some people were having issues with their HOTAS setups and stuff like that not working correctly. But I was just playing with a controller on a laptop today, and I thought it controlled very well for me. And I thought that, every time I pressed a button, it reacted, right? From changing the energy levels of the shields to thruster to, shooting to aiming. I think aiming was actually easier than I anticipated. Um, and taking out TIE fighters or X Wings or Y Wings or TIE bombers was fun for a short while, and then it became incredibly boring. And I think that's just, if you're a big fan of space dogfighting in general, just doing that over and over again, I think you'll have a really good time. I think I kind of prefer other things that come with that, not just doing dogfighting, such as playing games that also allow you to run cargo or passengers in space and sometimes dogfight. I think I've kind of grown past just doing the dogfighting. Um, it just doesn't interest me as much as it used to.
Well, I
But
mean, well,
mhm,
earlier you mentioned that people who like Star Wars Jedi Starfighter from 2002 and the original X-wing and TIE fighter games
mhm,
feel right at home. And if we're going to use the home metaphor,
mhm,
sometimes you I don't want to say you outgrow it because that implies you're beyond it, but basically, you move, you sell your home, and you're not interested in returning, and you have fond memories of it. You wouldn't trade that past for the world, but you're ready for something new, and your preferences
right,
change.
right. No,
So,
that's good. I mean, I think it's okay. It's okay, and I think people who still really enjoy the space dogfighting, and if you enjoyed it in Battlefront 2, you'll probably enjoy it here as well, right? Maybe even more so here. And you have a little bit of customization options when it comes to customizing your pilot. There are bobbleheads and things that can go inside of the ship that they've introduced. They were really proud about if you watched any of the interviews, and you can bring them along. And while I didn't really dive into the multiplayer much, I think that's where most people are going to find their enjoyment. The single player was kind of dull and the story was generic, but I think it kind of felt like it was just to introduce you to all of the ships and what they can do and all of the different things you might do in a fleet battle or, just dogfighting, and then ended ended the story after that. So um, that's pretty much how it is with the game. I kind of expected to be a little bit more
involved.
semi well, the simulation aspect. They did give you sort of a pseudo simulation in that you can control the energy level of your weapons or your shields or your engines by focusing on one. It will reduce the power given to the others, thus their effectiveness, but increase the effectiveness of the one you're focusing on.
So it's like a
So
tactical allocation of finite energy. You've got
correct.
you've got X amount of fuel or X amount of energy, whatever it is, and you've got three major areas in which you can distribute it, and
Yeah,
each
they
one
look
there are
like
costs.
the vertical volume knobs, on stereo sets or something.
Gotcha.
And you basically you can press one all the way up, which will knock the other two down one level because I think the base, or maybe it's two levels. I think the base is four for each, and then you can basically double that for one, but it halves the other two. So if you need your weapons to recharge faster, you switch to weapons, but you're also going to be slower and you may not have as much shields or anything. So it is something that you need to do on the fly, and I'm sure it's something that'll separate the people who have, it's like a skill ceiling, right?
Yeah.
So eventually, people who can master that will probably separate themselves from people who just leave it baseline or only switch it in certain situations. So there is some of that. I kind of I would have liked to been able to walk around, the ship on the outside, taking a look, doing system checks on everything, interacting with the droid, which really isn't there other than telling it to repair your ship, uh, and stuff like that. That's something that I would have liked to have seen in a simulator.
Yeah.
This one seems like it was kind of half done, or some people have mentioned it. I saw some reviews that mentioned it. It felt like it was a VR game that was turned into a full game, right?
Yeah.
Like how they
I remember you mentioning that particular review. It said something to the effect of, whereas some games are console based games that are poorly ported to VR, this was like the
right.
inverse.
Yeah,
that
and
squad.
oh,
No,
go
I'm sorry.
ahead,
Go
go ahead.
ahead. No,
Uh,
I was just gonna say that the inverse being, Squadrons was a VR game first and foremost, but it was poorly ported to consoles and PC. But the
well,
clear emphasis was on
mhm.
VR.
Well, I mean, I don't even know if the clear emphasis was on VR, but that's how it was. That's how it feels like it was designed, right? It was designed because VR can be on console and PC, right? It's not like a
Right.
separate. It has its own platforms, but it's not like it's separate from the two, you know. So it felt like it was designed the entire time to be sort of like the Vader mini games,
Yeah.
the
Vader
stories,
Immortal. Yeah.
kind of like that, but fleshed out for
Mm-hmm.
VR to have like a fun little flight sim in VR that wasn't very in depth. And then it feels like Disney said, we need something for this time period, or EA said, we need something for this time period, expanded into a full game. And then they just
Hmm.
took it and made it not VR. I don't know if that any of that's true or not. That's just how it feels because, and I didn't get to play it in VR, but I'll hope to try that in the future. But from what I've seen from the reviews and things like that, people really love it in the VR as an immersive cockpit experience. But playing it with a controller, just looking at it, really wasn't much different than playing any of the other ones, other than the slight, the ability to like turn missiles back, right, and
Right.
or to adjust your shields, engine, and weapon systems. So I kind of expected a little bit more.
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of simulators that basically make you click. Microsoft Flight Simulator, or even Star Citizen in some ways, if it ever gets complete. You get into the cockpit. You walk through your ship to the cockpit. I understand
Right.
fighters, you don't really do that. You just go into the cockpit, right?
Yeah.
But
It would just basically be
you
two,
can
two scoots forward in a, you really can't navigate a fighter, but some of the support craft are decently
or
sized. So
sizable, right?
yeah.
And sitting in the seat, getting the animation of climbing up the ladder, sitting in the seat, lowering the cockpit doors, or canopy, sorry, and flipping the switches and stuff like that. I like that, even if you don't physically flip the switches, but hovering over them and flipping the switches. I like doing stuff like that. And it's not necessary to make the game fun. Like I said, anybody who loves dogfighting is going to like this game, or at least like it for a little bit. But I think it
Yeah.
adds depth that was needed in a game where, especially in the single player, the story was kind of lacking, in my opinion, and the experience got dull pretty quickly.
Yeah.
So that's just for me.
And all I'll say is, having like watching you play, the game. I mean, we've said before, I'm not a diehard video gamer. That is much more your bag than
Uh
mine,
huh.
and I
Uh huh.
appreciate video games often as a cinematic experience, like just kind of like grabbing a bowl of popcorn and watching you, make your way through a game. But I have played video games before. I mean, I'm no stranger to it, and as we said, back in 2002, as 10, 11 year olds, we're playing these simulator games, which in many ways certainly graphically primitive compared to Star Wars Squadrons,
Sure.
but
Absolutely.
you know, outside of the initial experience, it seems like unless you are like it seems like these games appeal to like a very niche audience because even to somebody who enjoys video games as much as you do, it's like it will quickly like lose its appeal. And I'll tell you, just as someone who likes observing video game plays,
Mm-hmm.
it looked boring real quick. And I was trying to figure it out because again, the game looks beautiful, interesting premise. I like the idea of these dueling, again these dueling fighter ace teams, one for the New Republic
Right.
and one for the Empire.
Right.
The premise is solid. We don't have they're not. It's not like there are many simulator games out there. Star Wars is rife for it. I mean, all of it makes sense, and yet it just didn't seem immersive. And I almost wonder if like the conceit of a game, because you're looking out through the cockpit of a fighter. You don't
Uh huh.
see your opponent because they're in a starfighter. It's not personal. Everything feels distant. You know what I mean? And I don't mean just literally because you're talking about, you know, yards and yards and yards, meters and meters and meters. It's not like it's a metaphorical distance too. Like it's not personal in a lot of ways, and
Mhm.
it's interesting because obviously throughout the game there's gameplay dialogue between you and your teammates and your
Right.
opposition, and yet again it's like you're so removed from it. And there there are a few cutscenes. I mean, they're there, but they're relatively few. And then when you're not in a starfighter, you're just standing around in kind of a gameplay sequence, which isn't quite a cutscene, but kind of is. And you're just like standing there looking at people, unblinking, while they talk around you. And then you're back in the starfighter. I think it would have been more beneficial to have, you know, like, okay, it's a simulation game, but like you said, to have more personal involvement with your ship, like maybe you physically perform the customizations to a far greater degree. You can walk around your ship, you can traverse the entire capital ship, you know what I mean, and
Yeah.
interact with others. Maybe if there had been more of a role playing element, but just to go from ship to looking at looking at your commander, Lyndon James, and Terrace Carroll, or Terrace Carroll, excuse me, and then back into the ship, and then it seems so skeletal. It doesn't seem to have a lot of substance to it.
Yeah, and I think that's something that's traditionally found with a lot of VR games, right? Because they're not as fully fleshed out yet, because it's sort of a niche section of the PC gaming world, or the gaming world in general. And but people are working on that end. That's why it kind of feels like a VR game. It
Right,
kind of feels like an unfinished game. It feels like a half finished game, but not in the sense that it's broken or anything. It just
right,
feels like they finished all of the baseline stuff necessary for it to play, and to play well, and then added a bunch of stuff on top of it that was rather shallow. Like I mentioned the customization. Well, the customization really isn't that much, and and it could have gone a lot further, um, especially for multiplayer. So,
right.
um,
To an extent, I guess I understand that in universe, especially something like the Empire, where uniformity and anonymity are
sure, sure,
staples of the regime. They're trying to de-individualize you and humanize you, and you're just one of many. Many. You're a cog in a machine and all that. And I get it, but then I recall customization being like a selling point of the game. Like we watched an interview on StarWars.com with the lead developer of the game, and he kept mentioning
hmm
customization, 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 and yet it's like, okay, you can put this bobblehead here, or you can put another bobblehead. It just doesn't. It didn't live up
right,
to the hype in that regard.
right. It's there, but it could have gone further, and maybe they will go further. It could be one of those things that in a month it looks totally different. They were
Yeah,
in a release window and had to release because it's EA,
yeah.
and
I guess I hoped we were past that. I remember, we talked about in a previous episode when in 2015 when the first Battlefront remake came out and there was no
hmm
campaign. I mean, it was a beautiful game, especially for the time, and had some interesting set pieces like Jakku and watching the Battle of Jakku and the Star Destroyers and New Republic ships falling from the sky. I mean, there were some striking moments, but it was a very skeletal game.
it was rushed, right?
Oh,
So
100%. And then 2017, you have Battlefront 2, the Battlefront 2 remake, and it was a solid step forward. Still mixed in terms of reviews, right? I mean, it still didn't live up to the hype, but it was a solid. It had a campaign, an interesting campaign,
hmm
interesting premise, and over time, especially after the I guess the microtransaction controversy, when they ditched all that, and they constantly improved the online multiplayer and whatnot, and now it seems like Battlefront 2, the remake, is pretty well liked among Star Wars
yeah,
fans. And then in 2019, 2 years after that, then you have Jedi Fallen Order, which I have personally played many times. Fantastic game, not perfect, but truly fantastic. Solid step forward. Very interesting story, great
hmm
world building, interesting
I
characters,
agree.
memorable villains, fun gameplay, great enemies. And so with this coming, I was thinking, okay, maybe it'll be a continuation of that in terms of quality, or at least like a consistently good game,
Sure.
just in a secular, force, or excuse me, a secular space simulation way. And yet, based on what I saw you play, Star Wars Squadron seems more like 2015's Battlefront Skeletal Rush remake than 2019's compelling single player story experience in Jedi Fallen Order.
Yeah, and it may be close to that. I'm not sure if it's nearly. I'm not sure if it's on the level of the first Battlefront that was rushed out, but it
Sure.
certainly feels similar in that it had the premise or the possibility to do much deeper things. And I think that Star Wars fans are actually going to be pretty happy with it overall, just, as a dogfighting simulator.
Right.
But ultimately, the people who play it and continue to play it are probably going to be the people who love arena multiplayer, fighting each other in ships on the multiplayer side, right? That's what's going to keep it alive and
Well, I
determine
know
whether or not it gets content in the future.
well, I know you don't have a crystal ball and neither do I, but just as a video gamer, as far as your instincts go, I'm going to ask you a couple of questions. You just give me your, shoot from the hip, your off the cuff responses. If they don't offer much by meaningful DLC, how quickly do you see this game's population dropping?
Oh, within the first couple of months. That's just all video games, right? And it doesn't
Right.
matter if it's from, MMOs to whatever. If there's no content that's coming, population tends to drop down to the core base, right? Or
Right.
even lower depending on
If
if it was popular or not.
if they do produce content, do you think its numbers will rival Battlefront 2's, or do you think just it will not get that big because
Mm,
Battlefront 2 is more accessible?
I think Battlefront 2 has the ground combat going for it, which will pull in Battlefield fans as well as Battlefront fans. So I think it may not hit that type of number, but I think there's a large number of people out there who just absolutely love sci-fi games in general and are itching for more space combat and stuff like that. So I think it'll have decent numbers for a little bit. And if they decide to address any of the issues or whatever, or if they come out with updates that, free or paid, DLC, whatever, I think you'll see the numbers probably go up and down. But if they decide that it wasn't worth the effort and just kind of kill it off as a single player game that just had a multiplayer attached to it, then it'll probably go away fairly quickly. Not that it'll lose all of its players, but it'll drop from peak all the way down to the hardcore players who just stick around games for 20 years, pretty quickly. Gamers tend to move from game to game, so you know
Short attention span?
well, it's kind of that, and it's kind of like once the the newness wears off and the initial fun and excitement wears off, there's got to be something there that hooks people. And just for some people, that's not you know they, it, a dogfight space semi simulator, right? Isn't just going to hold them by itself without something. Some people really love cosmetic improvements or customizations. Some people really love the in-depth stuff like repairing your ship on, whatever, right? There are pulls and draws and maps and game modes and ships they get introduced to, help people stick around in the multiplayer, but that may not even be their goal. So I don't know.
Gotcha. Well, I guess the last thing I'll say with respect to again the game that I didn't play, I just watched you play. One thing that we mentioned in a previous episode, that I hoped would be the case for this game, and they did follow through with it, is they maintained its secular atmosphere. I love the Force, I love the cosmology of Star Wars. I think most people do who love Star
Uh
Wars,
huh.
but sometimes less is more. And I think that Star Wars stories should be very careful about when they do and do not include the Force. And it's good to have
Sure.
some stories that have basically nothing to do with it. They do make references to it. Lyndon James says, "May the Force be with you." I mean, it's
Right.
it's there, it's acknowledged, but it has no direct role, nor do any of its
Sure.
acolytes in the story.
Yeah, and I thought that was a nice touch. And it was they were kind of separated a bit from even some of the other major players, right? So the pivotal part of the story that I won't ruin here deals with something that's really important to the New Republic,
Right.
a project that's very important to the New Republic,
Mm-hmm.
and so but they didn't bring in all of the heavy hitters like Luke, right,
No.
to
No, they didn't.
help with that project. They were probably busy elsewhere,
Right.
and we did get some star power. Leia did some of the
The
it was
initial
like
voiceover,
propaganda,
yeah.
right?
Yeah, the
it was
propaganda.
like
Yes, that's exactly
yes,
what it was. No,
uh,
you're right.
it
It
was
was
New
almost like
Republic,
those the 1930s, 1940s pre-cinema, like
right?
when people would go to the cinema in the 30s and the 40s and they'd get these advertisements, the propaganda
Sure,
shorts to for recruitment and enlistment. Um,
and that's yeah,
yeah, that was effective, and Vader gave the Imperial counterpoint, especially at the beginning, and then
in the prologue, yes,
yeah,
and then we got to see some Rogue Squadron a little bit.
yep, right.
So I won't
Well,
give
and
that
and
away
and,
either,
and I
but
would say a lesser, a dwarf star of the star power for me is Admiral Ray Sloan, plays a role in this, and she's not a film character. She's not in any of the animated, um, the animated series. She wasn't in the Clone Wars, Rebels, or Resistance. But Sloane is a canon expanded universe staple. She was introduced in
mhm,
2014, one of the inaugural canon books called A New Dawn, which was a Rebels prequel, effectively. She was introduced in that book, and she has been an imperial through line, a supporting character in multiple books, multiple projects, and this is her first, as far as I know, her first like on-screen depiction. Um, Legends fans will remember Gilad Paleon, which was Grand Admiral Thrawn's protege, his Watson, the Watson to Grand Admiral Thrawn's Sherlock Holmes. Ray
yeah,
Sloan is in many ways her Paleon's canon counterpart. Um, an imperial officer, an imperial loyalist through and through, makes no bones about it, but is more loyal to the empire as a concept and as a regime than the emperor or Vader. She plays a prominent role in the in Chuck Wendig's Aftermath trilogy as well, that series of books, and it really emphasizes her philosophy that she saw the empire as a means to bring order and peace to a galaxy. She recognized it had clear flaws, and
right.
obviously that's a hell of an understatement. She is myopic in a way. The empire was poison fruit from the beginning. We know that,
Mhm.
and like the servants of many regimes in the real world and in fiction. She was too myopic to see it, and she was guilty of confirmation bias and excused all the excesses. But eventually, she came to recognize that the empire was a flawed, deeply flawed regime, and she became an architect of the First Order. Um, so none of that spoilers. I mean, she's been a featured character for the last 6 years of Star Wars canon. But this is
Right.
big stuff that she's been brought into, a high budget video game.
Yeah,
Um,
so it's a
yeah,
nice treat for people who have already read those books or have knowledge of the expanded sort of universe around the films and everything. And
right. And I'll say again, the premise, I mean, you quickly see, and we won't dive too deeply into the actual spoilers of the game, but I think it's fair to say from the offset that the game is functionally a battle, a very personal battle of wills between the commander of Vanguard Squadron, Lyndon Javes, and the commander
mhm.
of Titan Squadron, which is Teresa Carroll. And you as the player are almost like a chess piece, in that game, um,
Right.
in that personal battle. So there was some potential, I think, for genuine narrative heft and and stuff like that. But
Uh-huh.
I don't think it lived up to it personally. I think there were some
Yeah.
nice moments, but
Mhm.
it was a game that was more style than substance, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree with that. And just speaking of the story, it's very generic. You've seen it before in a lot of ways. It's very Star Warsy in that way, and it has some very Star Warsy tropes in that way. And it's not the worst story I've ever seen, but it's just very generic. And it really seems it just boils down to the single player portion of the game just seems like a test of all the ships for you to introduce you to everything with a little bit of substance on top for people who pay attention to lore in the Star Wars universe. It
Yeah,
gives you a little bit of filler in between the movie, the original trilogy, and the sequel trilogy. uh,
gotcha,
so
gotcha. I guess in conclusion, Bardikins, I'm curious what you would give Star Wars Squadrons overall on a letter grade scale. A being, if not perfect, about as asymptotically close to perfect as possible, and F being a decisive, absolute, unambiguous failure on every level.
hmm.
Go with your gut.
I would have to say I would give it a strong C. Buy it and play it if you are a fan of dogfighting and space and you want that Star Wars skin on top of it with a little bit of simulation elements to help spice up the combat. But don't expect much out of the story. If you're expecting deeper simulation outside of VR, which I haven't played, like I said, outside of the VR portion of it, if you're just playing with a controller, expect don't expect too much from it, and you'll be fine. You'll go in with a decently good experience that's ultimately shallow and leaves you wanting more from the Star Wars universe and from EA in that matter, or for that matter, excuse me. So I stand by a C.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Well, I had fun seeing you play it. Not really. I mean, again, quickly the mystique fell away, which is unfortunate. But yeah, I saw nothing that would cause me to dissent from your assessment there. Again, I hope that the Star Wars IP really did produce you know some great games in its time,
Mm-hmm.
and I think again, you know, Jedi Fallen Order. Still, I'm a huge fan of it. Solid step in the right direction. And I think that Star Wars games should be more like that. And I don't mean a regurgitation of the plot. Again, I want to see
Sure.
some secular Star Wars games as well. You know, I'd love to see
And
like
they can exist,
a Republic
right?
Commando 2 now that we know the full scope of the Clone Wars, stuff
Even
like
another
that.
bounty hunter game,
Yes.
something that's secular, or you can pull in a little nobody or something every now and then, but it doesn't. The main focus of the game, it'd be nice to have a good, well done secular Star Wars, um, that's
Right.
got a decent story and fun gameplay, even if it
Right.
doesn't have multiplayer.
Right. Agreed. So yeah, that's on my wish list, and Christmas is right around the corner, so maybe. But yeah, so where I guess my last question for you is, again, seems like EA's had a mixed record as far as its stewardship of the Star Wars video game IP.
Mhm.
I asked you to rate the game, you did. What are your thoughts about EA's record as of now? So again, Battlefront, Battlefront 2, Jedi Fallen Order, Star Wars Squadrons. I don't think we're missing any. I could be wrong. I don't think we're.
There were the Darth Vader games in VR,
Yeah, I guess
and
I guess I look at those as just again more niche games. But yeah, you do. You have Vader Immortal and all that. But um, what do you think? I mean, what is your assessment of EA's stewardship of the Star Wars video game IP, and what do you think
uh,
the future holds?
I think my assessment of their Star Wars IP, their history with it, is not a good one. It's mediocre at best. They had a gem in Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order, but previous to that had mediocre works and then come out with something that seems kind of bare boned again. And hopefully they have some good projects around the corner, but that will take input from the fans, from the people who want those games as well. You can just look at the struggling Madden community, right? Uh, with the Madden franchise being extended, having their exclusive simulation license extended, and being oh so mediocre at best for the past 10, 12 years. So I don't have. I'm not very optimistic about that, but since it is Disney and since it is Star Wars, they could perhaps come out with something that is more in depth, more fun. Not that this one isn't fun, but I'm saying something that has that fun that just keeps on coming. You come back for, that's engaging. Maybe has a good story. Maybe is secular. At this point, they might even need to do some more Jedi stuff just to get back into rhythm, and maybe even have their team that worked on Jedi Fallen Order. Was that Respawn?
That was
Uh,
Respawn.
that was Respawn. Work on more because clearly
Yeah.
they care, even if EA may not.
So you would say
So
that the contract with EA should respawn.
no.
That was a
Yes,
great
yes,
pun.
yes. I.
Yeah, Respawn's contract should respawn with EA. Yeah. So okay. Well, I'm with you. I'm kind of underwhelmed by it. And I guess there's really not much more to say than that. I mean, again, guys, this is a high, a very, high budget, highly anticipated game. A lot of people are bound to enjoy it. So don't be discouraged by anything we have to say. But here are that's our fresh thoughts. We recently played through the game, and in my case, watched it being played through, and um,
Mhm.
just wanted to you know tell it like it is, call balls and strikes, and yeah. So again, if you want it, it's $39.99. At least right now. Was it available on Steam?
Yes, it's on. It is on Steam. Pick
Gotcha.
it up, give it a shot. If you don't like it, and I guess you can refund it. I'm not sure how EA and Steam handle refunds, but since they're separate platforms, just using one
Right.
or the other. So give it a shot if you like dogfighting games. If you get a few hours of enjoyment out of it, it's cheaper than usual EA games and
Yeah.
no microtransactions. So that does have that going for it, but. Don't expect anything too deep, or don't expect a really rich story, even if you may enjoy a generic story such as that.
All right. Well, fair enough. Bardikins gives it a C, solid C. Hopefully, the next couple of games that we come across will be, A and B material. It'd be nice. And on that
That would
front,
be.
Bardikins, let me ask you just to go ahead if you want to preview, and you don't have to, give away the store. But as far as as far as Fictionology's video game forays, is there anything that you want to hint at or telegraph um, about
Well,
future
we do
ideas?
we do have a few let's plays coming up. We're going to have some fun with some grand strategies, and maybe a few other games as well. Some sandbox or open world RPGs, excuse me. We're going to be taking a look at those over the next couple of months. Should be fun, especially the grand strategies. I'm excited about that.
That does sound very.
Exciting, perhaps.
I want you to cut that. That was I had a total brain lapse. But anyway, yeah. So all right. Well, I appreciate the forecast for the future as far as our video games are concerned. And Bartikins, that's all I have. You have anything else?
No, that's everything I have. Guys, all 3, 4, I think 5 of you now. I think we're growing
Whoa.
slowly.
Hey, whoa. Hang
Thank
on.
you. Thank you,
You're
guys.
stretching now. Yeah, all
Yeah,
five people.
okay. 5 people,
I think
some
actually one
family.
left and came back. You're counting him or her twice.
That's okay. That's how my brain
Yes, yeah.
works. So.
Yeah, no, what Bardican said, we really appreciate any support, the views and the endorsements and things like that. We're going to continue to try to put out product here,
Mhm.
and give you our full thoughts about things. And hopefully you like it. And if you have any comments, criticisms, questions, suggestions, blood feuds you want to announce, I mean, again, by all means, we really appreciate it. And until next time,
Yeah. See you on the next one.
bye.